Thank you, Phil. So I'd like to call the meeting to order. It's now 6:30 and the first order of business on the agenda is present to speak. So if you could just, anybody on the line that would like to speak, there is an opportunity at the end of the meeting as well. If you wanted to hold off and wait till the end, that's it's up to you. Just state your name and who you are, really, like a parent or what your role is.
Oh.
I can't see everybody's faces, so if you do use the raise your hand, I should be able to see that. But if you are on screen, let me see if I can change my view. Okay, that's better. Okay, anyone present to speak? Anyone on the phone that's present to speak that I can't see?
A lot of people, 18 people. Ooh.
Okay, we'll go to the next item, which is a chairperson report. So I just wanted to address something regarding our meeting frequency. I think there's been some assumptions as to why meetings are canceled. I just want to recall us back to the beginning of when we first started meeting. There was a request to have 2 meetings on the calendar a month. And so while we didn't know if we were going to need those 2 meetings a month, we decided to, put it on our schedule as a placeholder, and that it was a lot easier to cancel future meetings if we needed to. And so, the meeting for, I think it was September 1st was canceled. And I think there were some assumptions as to why it was canceled. I hope that you guys trust my decision to cancel the meeting. I'm trying to be cognizant of everybody's time, as we're all volunteers on this committee. None of us get paid for this. Well, maybe not none of us, but town employees probably do. But I know for myself, this is a volunteer. So I'm trying to be considerate of that. We also, we have a need for a recording secretary. Our current recording secretary had given her notice a few weeks back, and we've been trying to hire somebody or trying to get somebody. I will ask at the end of the meeting. It's on the agenda tonight for some volunteers if anybody on the committee is interested in taking that role. So please, I just wanted to have you guys understand, we're not just, I don't want to have a meeting just for the sake of having a meeting. I'm trying to be cognizant of everybody's time, pressing issues that we have, if there are any, and the fact that we do need to find, recording secretary. And then, just don't make assumptions. If you have questions about why the meeting was canceled, just give me a call or send me an email. The other thing I just wanted to bring up was I think it'd be important as a reminder of this committee to just highlight a few points of what our charge is. Again, I think, there's an understanding of what the committee's charge is. And there are a few items in here, and it's not just to find a consolidated school K-8. It's not just about that. There are other items in our charge that we need to just remind each other of. The biggest one is defining a pre-K-8 school to meet Willington's educational needs in cooperation with the Board of Ed. That's the primary charge. It's number 1 on our list. I won't go through them all, but I wanted to just point out a few that I want to point out before we continue with our meeting. The other one is cooperating in securing of state funding to support the building program. I think there have been some questions and doubts about why do we need state funding? Why can't the town just build their own building? or renovate their own building. Well, it's part of our charge to secure state funding. We don't have a choice. That's part of our charge. Couple other things: finding and recommending a site if necessary to meet school construction and town needs, adhering to state statute at all stages of the project. This includes all the statutes related to securing funding for this project. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, is identifying potential future uses of the two current school buildings if necessary. So if we decide to renovate one of the schools, we as a committee, we have to identify potential future uses of the other school. So again, that's part of our charge. It's not 50% doing this part and 50% doing that part. There are a lot of other things in here. And, you know, it's just something I wanted to point out because I think, you know, it's important for us to remind each other as the committee what our charge is and try to stay focused. So that's what I had for my chairperson report. The last item, which is going to roll into number 4, our presentation with Scott Pellman from Colliers International. We also have Ken Guyette on the phone as well. Actually, I see him there. So I want to I invited them to come to this meeting to just talk to us about a bit of the process, not to get into, oh my God, this is everything we need to do. It's really just to highlight what is involved in the process. And I thought that would be helpful for the committee. We mentioned it in our last meeting that we were going to invite them. And again, they're volunteers. They're graciously coming to share with us some of their expertise. So Scott or Ken, if you'd like to, excuse me, if you'd like to say a few words and help us.
Yeah, I'll start it off. Thanks, Catherine. So my name's Ken Guyette. I'm a senior director with Colliers Project Leaders. I'm a resident of Mansfield. So this area is very near and dear to my heart. One of the things that we try to provide for our clients is information, right? Accurate information about how we can best support them and get them to be able to maximize their reimbursement from the state or their benefits from the state when it comes to their education projects. We've been highly successful in Mansfield doing that, as well as in Wyndham. And we'd be, thrilled to be able to pass that knowledge along to you all as well and help you in that process. Scott Pellman is our senior project manager who does the lion's share of our Connecticut K-12 work, public work throughout the state. And so I will pass it off to him right now, and he'll go through all the good idiosyncrasies of dealing with the state. Scott?
Ken, appreciate the intro. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, I do want to keep this more conversational this evening. I do have a single slide. We're really not going to do a formal presentation, but what we really wanted to do is just talk about a little bit about process, higher level, some of the tasks that you need to do, and ultimately, what an OPM does. And if you recall, we met back in March. I was joined by Mark Sklenka from our office. We talked a little bit about what an OPM does. I think you guys understand that, and from what Ken's intro. So we're really just going to focus on the project, the process, and what tasks we need to do to gather the information so that you, along with the town, can make an educated decision on what way to proceed. So sort of with that intro, if I can, Catherine, I will go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully everybody can see the document that's up on the screen now.
Thank you.
Okay, terrific. So what we did, and I'll run through this, but what we did is we sort of talked about initial tasks that you need to do in advance of or just prior to going and looking at this project in 2 parallel paths. In each of these, which I'll go into, would be done in parallel pretty much at the same time. One would be information gathering on a renovation project. It might be renovating a single building, it might be renovating both buildings. And again, the ultimate goal there is to look at the advantages, disadvantages of a renovation, either one or both buildings, what those costs would be, timeline would be, understanding what the state reimbursement would be and the state buy-in for those scenarios. At the same time, we take a look at information gathering for a new school as well. Very similar things. We'd want to take a look at timeline, what those costs would be, and ultimately bring that information to you that's organized very clearly, very simply, and in a format that can be distributed out to the public so they can digest and understand it. So, right at the top, again, what we would recommend is hiring a firm such as Colliers, an OPM consultant, to help you organize all this information. Again, from a pre-construction standpoint, this is what we do all the time. We come into communities. It's a matter of gathering all the information, gathering it and organizing it in a way that you can understand it, and that we don't leave any stones unturned. So there aren't a lot of questions. We can anticipate questions from the public, try and make sure that that information is available, that we've already addressed those questions. So when those questions come forward, the public feels that this committee has done its diligence and is well prepared to make recommendations to the community. We understand that Fryer Architects has done some earlier studies. We would want to compile all that existing information, review those studies, certainly based on not just today's economy, but the timeline. I think it's been 2.5 years or so since those were done. We want to take a look at the costs. Again, architects historically aren't the best estimators, we'll just say that. But, again, hiring an OPM firm, that's one of the things we do is we estimate, we do schedules, and we do value management, and we look at the cost and quality of a project. So, we feel that we could really get you in line with what an appropriate budget would be. One of the other first things you'd want to start doing is developing ed specs. We can assist with that. We can provide ed specs from other communities, similar schools, as a guide. The reason you need an ed spec is the ed spec is sort of your Bible. It's the Board of Ed coming to this committee saying, this is the building I need. These are the requirements. These are the spaces. These are the programs. And then what we would assist this committee in evaluating is, would either both of your existing schools or a new school, how would that ed spec be reflected in those buildings? How would the ed spec address, or how would it fit into those spaces? What would you have to do to make the ed spec work for, potentially all 2 or 3 options? We would want to solicit an updated population study. This is really going to be a key for going to the Office of School Construction Grants and Review. They base a lot on how many students are in the district. We do hear that they like to have a school that's at least around 400. Our understanding was, currently you're at about 420. We have actually in some communities recently seen an upswing. I looked at your older projections and they were actually on the downturn. But with the economy, with COVID, with the real estate market in Connecticut, we've actually seen some increases in student population in some communities. So we'd want to make sure that we had a real good handle on that. So again, what we can do is we can put together an RFQ, RFP for those services. There's a number of those individual firms that we work with, bring that to you, with those costs to get that work done, so we could jump right on that. And then it would be up to the Board of Ed to approve the ed specs. So, they would vote on it and they would say, yes, building committee, this is the project. This is the 21st century school we need. Now, get it done one way or another, get it done. So they'd hand you the ed spec. So I'll start here on the left side column. Again, kind of already talked about this. So this would be looking at a renovation project. And again, I think we do both of these in parallel, but I'll just go down this row. So we'd review your existing facility studies, walk the schools with you, talk to your facilities directors, really getting a good understanding of the existing facilities. Calculate the school size based on our new population study. So how many kids are coming in? They let you use the maximum number 8 years out from your grant application if you were going to pursue state dollars. Again, as Catherine stated, That I understand is the task of this committee. You could, potentially the community could come back and say, why, guys, what would it cost if we didn't go after state money? We would absolutely be able to tell you those costs as well. It's going to be the same cost estimate. It's just a matter of, are you getting some of the percentage back from the state? Yes or no. Talked about this a little bit briefly. We understand there probably isn't much there. If there is, it's fairly steep. Exploring any adjacent land, you've got a river behind the school, but certainly we don't want to leave any stone unturned. We want to make sure that if there's any community questions, hey guys, what did you look as far as available land? So you look at that. Develop a concept plan. It could be a concept plan for a pre-K through 8 school in one of your facilities with an addition, or looking at renovating the 2 existing schools in their existing configuration. So we take the ed spec, we can do a real quick test fit. How does that ed spec fit into the buildings? What are those permutations? So, potentially you could have, a center school, hall school, and then a combined pre-K 8 renovation at one or both options. Test fit the concept plan, develop a concept schedule. Certainly with renovation projects, schedule is going to be very important. You don't have any place, you don't have a lot of swing space to put the kids. If this is something that can be managed, we do a lot of these types of projects. We're doing a large one in Wyndham right now. We're doing a renovated new fully occupied of their high school, 240,000 square feet. If you're going to do a renovation,
That's where you went.
It's critical to develop a good concept schedule.
How are you doing it?
Because a renovation is going to take longer than potentially new construction. Again, concept budget, and then we'd review for renovation status. I won't get into the particulars, but there's criteria you need to meet with the state, and they would then potentially grant you renovation status, meaning they would allow you to renovate the project as new. We could certainly look at the renovation options also as just capital improvement projects. Maybe you don't renovate the building as new. What would those options be? If it was more of a systematic approach, over a 10 or 15 year period, and it was capital improvement projects. And then once we had that information in place, we'd want to set up a meeting with Costa from OSCG&R, run through all this information. And again, if it was the committee's wish, potentially push Costa to one or a few of those potential solutions, discussing with him to see again what state funding could be available. Moving to the new school site, again, a lot of the similar tasks. But one of the first ones we'd want to do is identify some potential sites. We have site evaluation matrices. We actually have civil engineers, survey departments. We have a lot of resources available through Colliers that can assist us in helping to identify potential sites. Calculate, again, the school size based on the population. So our updated population study will calculate a school size. Right now, the formula that the state uses would say that you'd be looking at a school of about 58,000 to 60,000 square feet. But we'd want to double check that with our population study, calculate that out, and we can put a school, we can quickly throw a block of area on the site, show you how the school is going to fit, do a test fit for the school, the parking, athletic fields. One thing we might do if we're starting to get a little bit serious about exploring a site is do a phase 1 site environmental. We work with all the environmental engineers throughout the state of Connecticut, Massachusetts. We bring them in. This is a pretty quick and fairly cost-effective option. It's usually going to be about $3,000. They will do a full site evaluation, evaluate if the site was ever contaminated, had resources or uses on it that may present a hazardous material situation, and then they would recommend whether you need to go to a next step. But again, if you were even considering a land purchase, we absolutely want to do a phase 1 study. We also might at that point then want to, if we're getting serious about a site or really exploring it, look at doing a preliminary site survey. Might be just a meets and bounds. We can use some existing topography that's available through the state of Connecticut. And if we look at a site, we see a lot of rock outcroppings, things like that, we may want to get a geotechnical rig in. It's cheap. One day you buy a rig, you pop a couple of holes where you think the building is going to be. Let's understand if we're going to develop a budget for a new school, what kind of strata are we dealing with? What kind of subsurface conditions? Develop again a concept schedule. Typically, new construction is going to be a little quicker than a renovation project. Develop that concept budget. Then we would also, there's a form required when you go for state funding, SCG 053. Fill that form out, meet with the state reviewers. They'd come out, walk the site in their opinion to see if it was acceptable for state funding. And then again, meet with OSCG&R and determine, are they in support of that particular project? Would they support it? Would they fund it? So with those two parallel approaches, what we do is bring all that information then back together. Develop a matrix of all of the options, not just new, but renovation. Could be a capital improvement renovations, could be renovate as new, could be one school, could be two, could be a new school on a site or maybe alternate sites. We'd want to present that, put that in, help market that with this committee, present it to the town. We would be advocates at these meetings to answer any questions that come up from the committee or the townspeople. Develop an updated final budget. Again, assist with public marketing. And what we look then is to try and get a project selected and then a project funded. You typically, the state would like you to have your funding in place before you file your grant, and the grants always have to be filed by June 30th of whatever year you're in. Again, I just put in 2022
Running out
here.
of time.
Certainly,
Okay.
this is achievable by 2022. You may decide, Scott, we got to go through this a little bit more, spend a little bit more time than it would be June 2023. There are avenues where if you can't or the public isn't convinced yet on the project, we have had referendums, town meetings after the grant application. We've worked with Costa and his department. They will let you do it. You just have to have your funding in place before they put your project on the priority list. So this sort of gives you a real quick high-level overview of sort of the basic tasks. There's a number of other little subtasks and things in all of these that certainly we would help you with or would love to help you with. And if you wanted to try and move this forward, I definitely think we could have a lot of the information prepared, by the fall, going into the winter season with enough time to really look at it closely and market something potentially for a spring grant application. So with that, I know I've thrown a lot at you, and I'll be happy to open it up for questions.
Thank you, Scott. And before we jump into questions, I appreciate you going through this and sharing this with us. I think just a couple important points, as Scott mentioned, the Board of Education approved the ed specs. That is something that, a consultant would help us prepare, along with a lot of these other tasks that you see on the left and the right columns. This is something that this committee is not prepared to do. There's a lot of information that goes into each and every one of these steps. Not to mention the requirements in the state statutes that have to be followed in regards to applying for any state grant money. Any misstep would cause, not being able to get the funding. So we really have to hire the people that know what they're doing when it comes to knowing how the state funding application works. That's all. I just wanted to mention that, and thank you again for preparing this. And yeah, so like Scott said, if there are any questions, please raise your hand and we'll go from there. Mike McCoo.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you both from Colliers for the presentation. With the prospect of possibly going forward and engaging a firm to do work like this or some portion of this work, obviously, as you know, we're dealing with public funds and we'd have to have some sort of an open process. You guys have a longstanding reputation in this line of work, but there are other vendors, right? There are other people who do this. So we would be able to do a public bidding process and meet those requirements, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That was my question.
Catherine, I'm not sure if you're looking at the participants list, but I see Erica's hand up and Ralph's hand is up.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the best view here.
Sorry.
Should we stop sharing? Okay.
Yeah,
Perfect. Thank you.
I anticipated that. I
better.
apologize.
So we'll go Erica.
Thank you. So Scott, thank you, and Ken for that presentation. I have two questions. One, is it possible for us to get a copy of what you shared on the screen? Especially for
Yes.
those,
Yep.
where the screen was a little bit.
Absolutely.
Thank you. One of the items was develop ed specs, and then the Board of Education approves that. So is that assumption that the Board of Ed is working alongside this committee developing ed specs? Or would this committee be developing them typically, and then a Board of Education approve them?
No, typically the Board of Education, because they're really their purview, their task is to develop the processes and educate the students in the district. So it would be the Board of Education, Phil and his administrators, and we also work with consultants. We've assisted, again, I've helped put together a number of educational specifications, so we can also assist in that process. But the Board of Ed puts together the requirements, what they need to educate the students of Willington. They approve the ed spec and then they hand it to you. And in essence, they're kind of done. At the end, you would come back to the project and you'd say, here you go, Board of Ed. Here is the project that we developed with the architect and with the owner's project manager. It meets your ed spec. We're on budget. And then the Board of Ed approves or accepts that project, and then we take it to the state for approval. So it's really, they develop the ed spec and they hand it to you, and then it's your job, your responsibility to build that building for them in whatever configuration, whether it's a renovation, a new, and we would, if we're again tasked with assisting you, we'd make sure that that building stayed on budget, on schedule, met the ed spec, was submitted properly to the state and followed all the proper channels.
Okay, thank you. So essentially, we're working simultaneously once we move forward with in either direction. Thank you.
And Ralph, did you say, hold on, Peter. Ralph, did you have a question?
Oh, of course I do. Erica hit on one, and that was to get a copy of that screen that Scott had shared with us. My question concerns the ed spec. And I know that we have the Fryer study, which is not particularly dated, but a little dated. Number one, does that have to, or should that be updated to get current projections? Some of the birth rate numbers are quite old. And I think they're relevant, particularly if we're looking at how many years down the road for the expected, in order to qualify for grants.
Well, they allow you to use the highest projected enrollment 8 years down the road.
Okay.
And Fryer actually doesn't have a demographer. They may have included information from another population study that was done by a third-party consultant. But we would want to get a new consultant such as Peter Prouda. There's a number of people that do that to get us the latest data. They go in and they take a look at birth rates. They took a look at housing starts. They took a look at real estate changeover. It's a science. It's not something that we do ourselves. We would hire that out. And it has to be somebody that the state also approves. It's got to be somebody that the state is going to accept. So that's very important. As far as the Fryer, I think from the conditions assessment, I don't think you would need to do anything else. I think I've briefly looked at the reports. I think they did a reasonable job at identifying some of the issues with the building. I think we'd certainly want to revisit those, go through it with your maintenance departments, with your facilities director. But the real key there would be updating schedules and budgets, again, on whatever project or projects, we look at and go forward with. I think their reports could absolutely be used for conditions assessment and identifying issues. But some of those issues might change depending on which approach you look at.
Okay, now with the ed spec, is that going to wind up forcing this committee into one direction or the other with regard to either a new school, new site, or some form of renovation, reconfiguration of an existing building?
No, the ed spec is really a list of educational requirements and spaces. You know, for example, we need a cafeteria that seats 200 kids in a lunch wave. You know, we need a full gymnasium for the middle school with bleachers for 200 students, or we need so many classrooms for pre-K, kindergarten, you know, and these are the requirements we need in those classrooms. So we would take that ed spec then and use it to evaluate the existing buildings and see how much of the existing buildings potentially could be modified to achieve those goals, or whether you partially build a new addition and then tear down some of the existing, or potentially look at all new. So
Okay.
it really is the needs. I don't think the needs are going to drive you in one way or another. It's a matter of how we accommodate those needs in the different configurations.
As well as the economics.
Well, that's always a driver. Absolutely. It's time and money. And again, schedule will be a big driver in this, and certainly, you know, financial impacts.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Peter.
Peter?
Good evening, and thank you for coming. Two questions. The first, what is the expectation of a consultant like yourself that the committee has done prior to starting your decision matrix? What questions should the committee answer as a committee tasked with identifying a school solution? That's my first question. And my second question is, when you're at the end of that decision process, new versus renovation, are there parallel plans that are both submitted to Costa and does evaluate both, or how does it work?
Well, I'll start with the second. You know, we could absolutely discuss parallel plans, you know, when we meet with Costa. Ultimately, you have to submit one. If you're going to go for state reimbursement, you can only submit one grant, one plan, one option. So, you know, I think, again, we would want to make sure, we would want to get his buy-in, potentially get his buy-in to two different, you know, parallel approaches, and allow the community to choose what approach they want to pursue. You know, once that was done, then that single project would be attached to the grant application, assuming you're going to pursue state funding, and we'd go forward that way. As far as expectations, you know, we see a lot of different committees, you know, volunteers, you know, sometimes there's a lot of construction experience on committees. Sometimes there isn't. Really, we come in with no real expectations. What we're going to do is just help you answer the questions, or work with you to, you know, educate you. You know, you don't know what you don't know going into a project like this. And this is what we do, you know, for a living. You guys, most of you probably have full-time jobs, you know, a lot of other things that are taking up your time. So, you know, we have no expectations for a committee. You know, our task is to come in and help you achieve your goal.
Thank you.
I can ask one more follow-up question, Catherine. Have you ever had situations, Scott, where you gave a range of options to the community to have some sort of referendum on versus a single solution? I'm
trying to think at the moment. There have been options within a referendum, you know, like, for example, a community decided we want to do a pool and the state doesn't fund pools. So, you know, as part of a referendum, should we procure an additional, if part A passes the building project, part B, would we want to add a pool on? We typically haven't done referendums on two different, and the problem there is the no's are going to be no's. And if you have two options, and if the yeses are evenly split between two options, it could be a defeat for the project. So, I mean, we would recommend trying to come to a consensus. And I think, you know, through a marketing standpoint, through discussions with your town finance department, through this committee, discussions with the Board of Ed, and public presentations, I would think that the best scenario would present itself.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Anne?
Thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. When does the Board of Ed work on the ed specs? Where in the process does that occur?
We would want to have the Board of Ed start that immediately.
Okay.
Because again, we can't really evaluate the building. We can start doing preliminary conditions evaluations. We can start a number of the tasks, but when it really gets down to doing a test fit, we really kind of need a developed ed spec. Doesn't have to be final, but at least it has to be a listing of, these are all the spaces we need. We need this many first grade, second grade, third grade classrooms. You might have some specialty areas. So we really need that good draft, solid draft of an ed spec to really get in and start doing that test fit evaluation of the buildings.
Okay, one more question. If we were to go with the parallel plan that you described, what are the cost differences if you're, say, drawing architectural plans for both ideas and duplicating everything along the way? Does that cost a lot more?
Well, we wouldn't propose hiring an architect because the architect's going to get too far into the weeds at this point. What you want is high level. What we'll do is we'll work in PDFs. We'll know the areas of the existing rooms or spaces, and identify and organize those in a plan. So that can be done fairly quickly.
Okay.
And can be done in a way it can be presented apples to apples so everything looks the same. If you're doing a new building, we're just going to assume it's 70% single story, 30% two-story for some of the upper grades, put a footprint on the building, throw a current square foot cost based on all the projects that we're doing right now that we see in the being built in the state of Connecticut, help develop some site costs and go forward that way. So you're not really developing full plans, you're developing concept sketches to make sure that the buildings, the configurations would work to meet the requirements of the ed spec.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
I have a question, Scott. I'm going to cut everybody because I can. So do you think it would be too soon for the committee to start engaging a conversation with the Board of Ed to start drafting or developing at least a draft of the ed specs? Because as you know, hiring a consultant, we've got some processes that we have to get through, and it might take some time. So do you recommend that we wait until we have an OPM on board? Or is that something we can start the conversation now with the Board of Ed to start developing those ed specs?
Yeah, no, I would absolutely recommend, going forth with the Board of Ed and asking them to start developing an ed spec. Absolutely.
Thank you.
So Scott, follow up. Who's the expert in that situation then?
I'm sorry.
So I guess, and as superintendent, am I the expert in that situation?
I think for the initial, as far as the superintendent, you would be the expert leading you and your administrators leading the Board of Education and development of the ed spec. And Phil, we can, Ken and I could get you the names of a few consultants if you wanted to, consult with somebody who develops those. And I'd be happy to send you a sample or two of some ed specs as well that you could use and thumb through as a guide as a starting point.
Thanks. And then my second question was, I just want to make sure it's clear because this wasn't clear when I learned the Mansfield process. What you're talking about, the test fit, that test fit goes to, is that the cost, is that what goes to the voters when you're talking about getting the money approved ahead of time? Because I think what was confusing in the Mansfield project for me was what was approved. I think there's some general drawings at that point, and then that building changed. What some of the spaces changed, the overall layout, and I just want to make sure that's clear for the committee because I didn't understand that.
Right. It's once you hire the architect, and after the referendum and the budget's passed, they're going to create a vision for the school working with this building and for this building committee you're going to steer that direction. You're going to be looking at every step of the way of their design and commenting on that design. But really the test fit is just to say, do we have enough area? Is the building organized from a standpoint that makes sense educationally and works? Doesn't necessarily mean that all the first grade classrooms have to be in the north wing and all the second grade classrooms in the south wing, for example. An architect may come in with a different vision, but what we want to do is we want to say, we know we need to build 20,000 square feet and we're going to demo 30,000 square feet, to achieve this goal. And we're going to make sure that we we have that covered in the budget. Or, from a concept standpoint in a new school, we know the state will give us 58 or 60,000 square feet. We'll leave it up to the architect to design a phenomenal building for 60,000 square feet, but we don't need to hire them beforehand to get a referendum passed. Because again, as you pointed out, and what happened in Mansfield is the design does most likely will change. And, and if you hire an architect in pre-referendum, he may not be the architect you hire to do your final design.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yes. Another question,
Can I-
another question.
Hold on, Ralph. I'd like to get some folks who haven't spoken up, and then I'll go
Sure.
back to you and
Fine.
Peter, if you don't mind. Okay, Ralph, I see your hand. Anybody else on the phone that would like to ask some questions? Any questions for us, Ken or Scott?
When can we start? We're chomping at the bit. As you can see, we're very excited to jump in, and we're really looking forward to working with this committee if given the chance.
Well, thank you again for coming out. Peter, why don't you go ahead?
Just a quick question. Is there such thing as generic ed specs that we get access to for say a rural town of 6,000 people?
Well, yeah, like I said, I think we can send you some samples. Every community is a little different on the way they educate the kids. There are some generic formatting samples that the state of Connecticut puts on the OSCG and our website. But again, it's really more of a formatting approach for an ed spec. But we can provide some samples. This committee can certainly reach around to some neighboring communities if they've done some projects as well. Phil, I'm sure you've got a lot of superintendents that you know of that have done projects that I'm sure would be willing to give you a draft sample as well.
Yeah, I already have the ed spec draft from Mansfield from their project, just as a backup.
Okay, Ralph, did you have one more question?
One more question for Scott. Have you had any experience with a multi-use building, municipal building that was part school and part municipal?
Yes, I have. It does get a little bit tricky from a funding standpoint of breaking out those areas. Typically, we do it on square footage for cost because the state's not going to pay. Again, if you pursue state funding, they're not going to pay for you to build a portion of a town hall. They will pay for Board of Education facilities. I do have a project right now that is a combined high school, Board of Ed, and early childhood development center. But the state doesn't pay birth to 3. They will pick up the tab from pre-K on. So again, we had to identify the areas that were associated with birth to 3, separate those out financially. So long-winded answer, short answer is yes, we have experience doing it.
Thank you.
Okay, Phil?
Just one more question, sorry. One of the things that has come up in conversation,
Yep, go ahead.
Scott, is our pre-K program is limited to space right now. If we were to create a larger pre-K program that accepted more students, does that increase would that count towards the square footage allotment?
It counts towards square footage, and it also, if you don't have, I guess, would you be talking about just increasing the program or going to full day pre-K? Because the state will bump up your reimbursement. They will provide additional money if you go to full day pre-K.
Okay.
So we could absolutely look at those permutations of classroom space, cost, staffing, and then potential reimbursement from the state.
Thanks.
Okay, let me see. Anybody else? Well, these questions were excellent. Gary, did you have your hand up? Sorry.
So
Gary,
Justin,
did you have your, no, okay.
Scott,
No, I'm good. Thank you. Sorry.
Catherine, Justin in the room here had a question.
Scott, so that last statement that you just said, so if this is full day pre-K, that's covered under the state's guidelines?
the state will give additional reimbursement if you're going to a full day from a partial day, half day. If you go to a full day program, the state will give you some extra percentage points as reimbursement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ann?
Just a point of clarification, if you do the half-day pre-K program, you still get reimbursed. You just get extra reimbursement if it's a full-day program. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, and I apologize. I don't know the specific parameter off the top of my head, but yeah, there is additional. But yeah, they don't penalize you if you're only doing a half day.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think that's it, unless there were any last minute questions for coming out here today on your own time. And, sharing with us a little bit of the process and answering the questions of the committee. But we do appreciate you guys coming out, and you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but we understand if you have to bow out. So thank you.
I got to try and get the rest of my lawn cut before the rains tonight, so I'm going to respectfully say good evening to everyone.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So the next item should be an easy one, approving the meeting minutes from our regular SBC meeting of August 4th. Is there a motion on the floor to approve the meeting minutes?
So moved.
Ralph? Second,
Second.
Erica? And I guess we have to do a vote individually, is that right?
Oh, we should hit any discussion if there is any after the second.
Okay, any discussion?
And Catherine, you
No
don't need to do a
discussion?
roll call unless it's not unanimous. If it's not unanimous, then you need to do a roll call.
Okay, thank you. So all in favor, say aye.
All right.
Aye.
Okay, it looks like it's unanimous. So motion approved to approve the meeting minutes, regular SBC meeting minutes of August 4th. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is our communications. I just wanted to share with the committee that I did reach out to Alice with the Hall Foundation. I shared with her some of the questions that were shared that we're going to be looking at tonight, as well as the agenda for this evening, and inviting her to join us. And I do not have any SBC emails to share with you guys. And I think that's it for communications. Next item is our subcommittee reports. Do we have an update? Or we have two current subcommittees.
Is it Catherine breaking
We're
up?
losing
or-
you a lot.
Okay, yeah. Catherine, your connection is.
I was afraid it was us here in the room.
I'm sorry, how is it now? Not good?
Well, it's better.
So
Maybe.
Catherine, you were looking for subcommittee reports? Is that what you were asking for?
Yeah, or just an update from the the land acquisition subcommittee. I know I saw an email the other day that we're gonna be having our next meeting.
Yes, so based on a poll of the members of the subcommittee, everyone seems to be available the evening of the 22nd. And so I asked everyone to hold that date. We'll get an agenda out, and as I told the members, respecting the public comments and board member comments about there being some desire for clarity on the direction that the overall committee is taking, I thought it would be prudent for the subcommittee to make sure we were clear on our strategy, for our meeting to be clear that we are not narrowing down to one path, that we're still trying to be as open as possible about options. And so that will be discussed in the subcommittee, and a methodology for evaluating potential properties, including the properties we own right now that have schools on them right now. Those will be the topics of discussion. And that I did notice in the presentation we just saw tonight that there was discussion very specifically about a matrix for property evaluation in their list. So I think it puts us on the right path. And, you know, perhaps we can find that tool. There also is a lot, if you look at the state's school construction guidance, there's a lot of guidance right in there about what they're looking for in a piece of property. So I think that gives us enough for a meeting right there.
Thank you. So we'll look for something from Mike with the specifics on the agenda and the time on the 22nd of September.
Yes.
Thank you, Mike. Any updates from the communications committee?
Yes, we will be meeting next week, at which point Peter will consider your suggestions. So we'll be looking those over and have them ready for the committee the next meeting after that.
You have a date and time, Ann?
Yes, we do. It's going to be, now help me out. I don't have my calendar in front of me, Phil. It's the 21st at 1 o'clock. No, 22nd at 1 o'clock. Okay. We had 3 potential dates. That's why I wasn't absolutely sure. Did you get that, Peter?
1 o'clock.
On the 21st.
22nd.
21st?
22nd, sorry.
Yep, September
22nd.
22nd at 1
Same
p.m.
day as
Okay.
land.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, that's a Wednesday.
Is that Zoomable, or is it only in person?
Definitely.
Oh,
Zoom.
Zoomable?
Oh, great. Thank you.
And will you send out an agenda as well for the committee members, or? Yeah,
Goes out.
okay.
And it's a public meeting.
Catherine, you were cutting out a little bit there.
Yeah, I think all of us are, Ralph, except for you, maybe, because you're on the phone.
I'm not on the phone. I'm online.
but-
I just don't have a camera.
Oh, are you? Oh,
It-
well, you have great connection then.
Anyway, I'd like to make a motion to establish a subcommittee.
Okay, motion.
To establish a subcommittee to develop a reconfiguration / partial or full renovation and or addition option for Hall Memorial School. And I would be willing to chair that.
I'll second that for discussion purposes.
And I would certainly appreciate some volunteers to assist.
Are we starting the discussion, Erica? Because I do have a question.
No,
You
I
seconded.
seconded for discussion
Seconded.
purposes.
Okay, so do we vote on this or?
We just discussion.
Discuss.
Okay,
discuss
so
it.
can I start the discussion? So Ralph, I have a question about that. So
Sure.
how this subcommittee, how would that be any different than this committee?
We're gonna, I wanted to go into details about what can be done with Hall School. Obviously, we have issues meeting code to do a full renovate as new of Hall School. I think everyone recognizes that issue. However, we have a number of additions to that school where renovation may not be out of the question. And if we were to separate, and I've gotten on this idea in the past, if we were to divorce the 1922 building from any use as a school, that eliminates a lot of the code issues that we would have to resolve to qualify for any kind of funding for renovation to new. Certainly the existing gym has potential, and the additions to the south have potential. The ability to add a second wing to the south so that we can accommodate the young kids being on the same level as the gym. And by doing such, I believe that it's possible to phase this in such a way that we don't disrupt what's going on there now. And it also affords us an opportunity to take a serious look at energy use. And most of all, and most important, I think, is the philosophy of recycle, reuse. What's the carbon footprint of renovating versus the carbon footprint of a new school on a new site? All of these things, I think, should come into play here. And that's why I want to do this with Hall. I want to take a good hard look at what is possible. And I know that Costa would at least give us the opportunity to present him with a partial, a concept plan of something like this. I don't think he's going to shoot us down right off the bat. And I think it needs a serious look. And that's my pitch so far.
Thank you, Ralph. Just one more small question, and then anybody else that wants to speak. So do you feel like we can do this as a subcommittee without the assistance of a consultant like Colliers, who could probably shed a lot of information to help us review this? Because, in my mind, I'm envisioning that this committee has to do that anyway, but I can appreciate your approach where you want to dig into the details a little more. I'm just curious about the timing of whether or not we need to establish a subcommittee, or if we just hire the consultant and work with them to do exactly what you're asking.
I think we need to develop a concept for this kind of approach before we sit with a consultant to evaluate exactly how this could work. We need to be clear that it's even feasible, and it requires investigation of the existing school. I would really like to get my hands on the plans for all of the additions that have been added to the 1922 building. I would like to go out there and shoot some grades to make sure that my concept of putting a wing at the same level as the gym is doable. I believe that it is, just visually examining the site. I think there's tremendous potential there. But I think that we need to have a concept of how we're going to isolate one portion of the building from the school before we sit down with a consultant to run through all of the details that I may not be privy to as far as the needs to satisfy the design criteria for school. I don't profess to be a school design expert by any stretch. The one thing that I do have a lot of experience with is building modification. And that's why I want to pursue this.
Okay. Any other discussion, Mike?
On the surface, this idea has a lot of interest for me. I've played around with the exact same thoughts in my head. And we've even discussed lightly in some of our previous meetings, ideas such as saving the facade and renovating everything behind it and things like that. So there is definitely some thought process that goes along with this. I don't know exactly where the timing fits in, if it's the right time to jump into that or not. But more importantly, with all of the current resistance to the board being narrowed to any one particular path, and all of the sort of commentary and distress that's been going on about people being concerned that the board or that the committee has already selected a path of a new school. And taking all of that into consideration and the need for us to be more aware of that and address that we are not narrowed to one path, it seems maybe poor timing at best and at worst hypocritical for us to now pick a different narrowed path and say, all right, let's throw some resources into picking a particular path, when we're being told by the public that they are concerned about us being on one particular path. So if this is a path that the people are complaining like more and it's okay to go down that path, then that's great for the people who are unhappy with the previous path. But that doesn't mean we're doing our job right as a committee to evaluate the paths. Finding a path that people like so that they stop being concerned about a different path is not the way we should decide what path to be on. We should evaluate if it's meeting the needs. I don't know if the ed spec needs to come first. I'm really not sure, but for discussion's sake, I think if we're being told, do not narrow yourself to one path, then we should not be narrowing ourselves to one path. In which case, this should not happen right now.
I disagree.
Thank you, Mike.
Of course,
Gary,
I expect that.
Gary?
So Ralph, I really appreciate your enthusiasm. I think it's great, and I share some of your thoughts about, maybe some of the opportunities for that particular concept. So I think that's fantastic. But I will share some of what Mike's thoughts were as well. I think, we heard tonight, I think, a really good presentation from professionals who have done this, 100 times probably. And I think we really have to go back to the beginning and look at all the different options that are in front of the committee. That's really our charge, and I think that's step number one. And I think, once we do that, some of these things, like the one that you're talking about, some of these options will come to the forefront, and then we can really, focus on one or two. I like the idea, certainly perhaps for later on, but I think for right now, I think, our first goal has to be to kind of go back to the beginning, have experts kind of lead us, look at all these options, develop a matrix, and help us, navigate what the criteria are for what would work and what would not work, and then kind of choose one of those options and march forward in that direction, or one or two directions as we've talked about today. So those are my comments. Thanks, Ralph, for the idea.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
I understand.
Ralph, hang tight, please.
Okay,
Anne?
I think if you go through that process with the project manager, when we bring that person on board, whenever we do, then you will have answers to all your questions as they arise. The specifications, the state rules, and all of that. So as everyone else has said, I think maybe now is not the right time, but maybe when you could work with the project manager to explore that possibility.
all I'm asking is that we create a conceptual plan of that possibility. That's all I'm asking for.
Well, it sounds like you want a subcommittee to do that, so.
I think it should be on a parallel path with all our options, for sure. I'm investing my time to do this for the committee. That's what I'm asking for.
Peter?
I want to speak in support of this subcommittee. Certainly, you could make the argument, applying Mike's logic, that by spending the amount of time we've spent on potential sites for new schools, that subcommittee is certainly weighing heavily in one direction. And I think that's some of the criticism we've experienced from the public. So I think adding subcommittees actually would balance things out and address what Catherine said in her report to us at the beginning of the meeting, that we need to look at our whole charge. Having parallel subcommittees working on different aspects of this entire project just makes sense to me. So I think this is a good idea. The only risk, having served on subcommittees in the past when I was on the Board of Ed, is that people take such an interest in the subcommittees that the larger committee becomes a committee of the subcommittee, so to speak. But I think it's a good idea. And I think some of the frustration from the community is that we haven't made a lot of progress other than going into executive session and looking at potential sites. Subcommittees can get a lot done outside of this larger setting and give us an opportunity to not work against, but in parallel with the consultant when they come on board. But I agree also with what Gary's saying. We need to accomplish some broader goals as a committee of the whole, or the entire committee, and let the subcommittees look at things like communications or in this case, renovation. I see no harm in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I just want to make a comment of what you just said regarding having subcommittees that go down both paths. It appears that there's an assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there's an assumption that our land acquisition committee is only looking at land. That is not correct. The land acquisition committee has only had one meeting, and that was to review a potential site. That's it. We haven't had any other meetings to discuss what existing properties we're going to look at or existing buildings. These are all things that is going to look at. It's not just geared towards new sites. It's looking at what does the town own? What buildings do we own? That includes Hall School, that includes Center School, and we haven't even had a second meeting yet. So I think while I do appreciate Ralph's excitement, as Gary and Mike have pointed out, it is exciting to see what is the potential of Hall School. I'm just not sure the timing is right to set up a subcommittee for this. I think we need to give the land acquisition subcommittee a chance to do the investigation and the research on what the options are. And maybe we can table this request and revisit it. Any other comments, Brianna or
Dustin.
anybody else from the committee? Hi, Brianna.
Hi, I do have a few thoughts. So yes, part of our charge is looking at all possibilities. And I'm wondering if there's anything keeping Ralph or any committee member from doing their own research, from making their own plans and exploring options to come back and share with everyone. What we do not want is a division in this committee here based on what we personally think should happen. We are a group that is here to work together, and we need to do that as respectfully and the best that we can for one another. So that subcommittee, Ralph, concerns me because when you start having subcommittees, sometimes like it can get a little bit cliquey or club-ish, and that kind of will cause non-transparency for the rest of the full committee, I worry. So is there, and I guess my question really is there anything keeping any one of us from doing our own research and bringing it back to the full group? Because having a subcommittee for that exploration of Hall School makes me nervous for those reasons.
Thank you, Brianna. Bill?
I just want to respond to Brianna's question. Brianna, I tend to be the person who holds a lot of that information. If Gary has his own little work that he's doing, Ralph has it, Mike has it, Catherine has it, Ann starts doing it. I just don't want to spend a bunch of time pushing out documents to people that is just for without that work in the end. I think eventually we'll get to that point, but I think if people start going off on their own, that makes me a little nervous about the amount of work we're suddenly, putting on me, because I kind of chuckle that when Scott Pellman says, "Who's your facilities director?" and I'm like, "Oh, that's my hat." who's the curriculum director. We need to think about all those things. So I just don't want to, I want to be cautious about that as well. Sorry, Justin, I cut in front of you.
Okay. I just wanted to
Go ahead.
say that Ralph, I'd be more than happy to help with that task. I am concerned though, as a committee, that we are jumping down too many different avenues and not focusing on what needs to be the main goal, and knowing what we need from the Board of Ed, class sizes and all of that. I mean, I think we could go out there and what the possibilities could be, but I think we would still need other information to be able to be successful at that.
Erica?
I'm good, thank you.
Anyone else on the committee?
Mike,
I see Mike, but I'll call on him. Mike spoke before, so I want to give the rest of the committee members a chance. I think everybody spoke. Okay, Mike, go ahead.
I just want to follow up. I really do like the idea. I actually have been holding out hope that this would be one of our solutions. I think the legacy of Hall School is important, and I think the ability to sort of reimagine and reuse that property, if we can come up with a viable plan, if we can meet the state's expectations, if we can address the land size issue, all those things. I love the idea. I do. I don't think this is the right time, and I'm particularly sensitive to the difficulty we've had with our process so far on Board of Finance and things like that, where people, well, one of the chief complaints has been, there's a concern that this committee has already kind of picked a direction, and that people are concerned that we're not evaluating all the options. Thank you.
okay, and this is primarily why I think this may be a good time to do this, to show that we are considering more than one path to get to an end product. Now, the general consensus that I'm getting from my fellow committee members here is this is not the right time. We can do one of two things. We can bring it to a vote and reject it if that's what you all choose, or I'll withdraw the motion at this meeting and bring it up in a future meeting. But I will not let go of this idea of trying to reconfigure Hall School to provide for a K-8 school, as well as additional municipal building space.
Ralph, I would agree with your latter recommendation, because a majority, it sounds like there's a lot of us that actually like the idea, and just feel that the timing is just not right. So I mean, I would recommend that you bring it up in a future meeting, or perhaps after we are able to hire a consultant, and we could work on that. That would be one of the goals of the committee. And if at that point you want to create a subcommittee, I mean, we can certainly bring that back to the table. I would hate for you to, I would hate for us to put it to a vote and say no, because I think, like I said, there's been a shared interest in your excitement and your idea as being one that we should explore. So I'll leave that up to you, what you'd like to do. There's a couple people that want to comment.
I think Gary does.
Gary?
If I may, Madam Chair, I was just going to ask Ralph one question about what he just said. So Ralph, you said you would not let go of the idea of this idea. And I just wanted to ask you for clarification on that. If we go through this process of research and have consultants come in we find out that, you know, maybe it is not feasible, your idea may not be feasible, would you be willing to give up the idea if that's the case? I'm not saying it is, but it's,
The bottom line for this committee is what is going to work best for the town of Willington and the kids and the school system in Willington.
Mhm.
If this concept flies in the face of logic with respect to logistics and with respect to the financial burden, well, we go in a different direction. I'm looking for the best solution for Willington. This is one parallel path that I think we should be taking to show the townspeople that we are not focused on just a new school on a new site, that we are seriously exploring all options. If we do not do this, then the perception that this committee is only focused on a new school on a new site is going to continue. And I think that's bad for the goal of this committee.
appreciate that answer. Thank you, Ralph.
So Ralph, what would you like to do?
I think there's a couple other hands up, so I'm gonna wait
Uh-huh.
Erica?
until they weigh in.
Okay, Erica?
Thank you, Catherine. So Ralph, I like the idea and the concept, like others have said. We asked, this committee asked for funding a couple of times from the Board of Finance. And I think what we've heard from them and different members is that they want to make sure that we are looking at both avenues. There's an assumption made by members on this committee and members at the Board of Finance that we have already decided. We have not decided. I would be more than thrilled if what was to be able to utilize a school that has so much history is important to this town. We have to look at that. We haven't decided we're not going to do that. We've made no decisions. We saw a great presentation tonight, putting those dollars that we're asking for to use that will take us down two paths to determine what's best for Willington. And while I love the idea and what you're proposing, I think when we bring these things on board, we will get all of those questions simultaneously while looking at a new option and determine what's going to be best for us. So again, the concept is great. I'm just not sure it's the right time. The proposal of how the dollars that we've been asking for are going to be spent is going to get to that. And hopefully people will see that we are looking at both a new or bring forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Two more comments, Peter and Ann. So Peter, go ahead.
Ladies first.
Go ahead, Ann. Unmute.
Unmute.
I'm agreeing with Erica with what she just said, and I really like the plan that we received tonight from Scott, that we follow two paths simultaneously. And the way I see that is we bring our project consultants, managers on board. And then at that point, Ralph, then your committee can make a subcommittee to review the one path of Hall, and then, then whatever other path we want to pursue. But I really feel at this point, we need to have the guidance of our project manager. And I think I'd love to see the Hall idea pursued, but I think in conjunction with him or her. And then also simultaneously with any other option that we decide to look at.
Thank you, Ann. Peter?
Thank you, Catherine. I want to strongly encourage Ralph for you not to withdraw your motion. I think that this subcommittee would be a valuable addition to our effort here. And I'm concerned about the hyper scrutiny that's now being applied to this subcommittee that we certainly didn't do when we established the communications committee. We all agreed it was a good idea. It didn't happen when we established the land acquisition committee, which certainly suggests one direction only. Yet, now that we have something that's outside that mainstream, which has been the focus of the larger school building committee, suddenly it's not the right time, suddenly it's inappropriate, suddenly we lack guidance from experts. If we have volunteers willing to share their knowledge with us, I can't see how that can't be an asset. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. All right, Ralph,
Call the question.
I'm sorry.
Call the question.
He wants to vote.
He wants us to vote. Can I ask for a roll call vote?
All right, let's do a roll call vote. Do you want me to call in the members or Brianna?
Maybe Phil can, since he's a non-voting member.
I think the chair should do it.
Okay.
Okay, do I get to vote?
Oh, you
Okay.
vote last typically.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's start with Erica.
No,
Phil? Oh, Phil's non-member. Brianna?
No.
Ann?
No,
Mike?
No,
Peter?
Yes,
Gary?
No,
Did I miss anybody?
Justin,
Justin, thank you.
I'll vote yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear his vote.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, Ralph made the motion and I'm gonna say no. At
I
this,
get to vote, don't I?
yes.
Ralph,
Obviously,
Ralph didn't
yes.
vote Catherine.
and I am a no. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 no's, 2 yeses. Is my math right, Brianna?
No.
3 yeses.
I have 3 yeses.
1, 2, Peter, yes, okay. So 3 yeses and 6 no's. So the motion fails, but Ralph, I encourage you to bring it up in another meeting, just the timing in my, as for my vote anyway, it's just a timing thing.
No, I'm not gonna let go of the concept, that for certain. I'll bring it up again.
Thank you. All right. So I think that was our section on subcommittee reports. I was going to move on to old business.
no, you can't move on. I want to stay in this section for a moment, if I may, Catherine.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
I'm not finished with this section.
Okay,
I would like to make a motion that the Willington School Building Committee establish a finance subcommittee, the purpose of which would be to look at revenues for a school project and costs of potential school projects. And I would be willing to chair that subcommittee.
okay, thank you. Is
I
there a
think
second?
Justin has a point of order.
This was supposed to be subcommittee reports. So I'm just thinking, maybe we voted on something and this, well, what Peter's bringing up right now should really be brought up under new business instead of subcommittee reports.
I agree. And that should have gone for the last vote as well.
I'm sorry, Erica, what did you say?
We're really saying these are new business items. These are not subcommittee report items. So I think it would be better for us to take a vote to add a new business item to the agenda and then have a discussion then.
All right, well, we already did, we already did it for Ralph's recommendation, so do we have to go through that all again under new business?
No, anyone can bring up a motion when they want to bring up a motion. Even if we did it in the wrong place, the motion failed. So we haven't taken an improper action. We should, realizing now, we should have done it in a different part of the meeting. But we can always discuss this more in the correct part of the meeting.
Okay, so it sounds like, Peter, your suggestion for a motion should be brought up during new business. Would you mind holding your thought and bringing it up? We have a few more items under old business and then we'll jump into new business.
Can I suggest a friendly amendment to his motion to add a finance subcommittee to new business?
So we're adding an agenda item under
Catherine,
new
hold-
business.
Catherine, hold on. Let me help you out here.
I suggested a friendly amendment to his motion.
So Peter made a motion under this item. And really, the last item should have been under new business, but we handled it under committee reports. Peter just made a second motion. Erica is offering a friendly amendment to put that item under new business. So Peter needs to determine if he agrees with that. If he does not agree with that, then you basically, as chair, need to determine if it's out of order, I believe, or if it would fit in the right spot. If Peter accepts the friendly amendment, then the committee needs to vote to determine if that item would be added to new business. Did I get that correct? I believe so. So Peter, you would need to determine, are you accepting Erica's friendly amendment to add the item under new business?
Which would make it item C under new business?
That is correct.
Certainly.
So if he accepts that friendly amendment,
I
now
will
you would
second
have
it.
is
I
there,
will second it.
you seconded it? So
Mhm.
Erica, is there typically discussion, or Mike, is there typically discussion under adding an agenda item like that, or do you just vote?
There would be discussion.
Well, I want to go back to the point of order. Is the motion in order as I guess as an agenda add, it would be in order now.
Yes.
All right. So thank you for allowing me to say that out loud. So I don't believe there's discussion on adding an agenda item. But I'm not 100% sure of that. I could run and grab Robert's rules if we need. Or can we see if we move on without controversy?
Unlikely.
I think it's safe enough to do. I think we should just vote and put it on the agenda.
Okay, are we taking a roll call vote or are we taking a unanimous vote to add it to the agenda?
We don't know until we try it.
All right, let's see if everybody's in agreement to add Peter's request to add a subcommittee as a new agenda items, finance subcommittee. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, motion, abstentions, motion passes. So this item will be added as item C to the new business request for finance subcommittee. All right, let's jump back to old business. Item A is our school building committee funds. So as most everybody knows, we have presented some language to appropriate the $100,000 of consulting fees to the Board of Finance a couple times. Hearing their concerns from the Board of Finance meetings, it sounds like they want to understand and try to allocate a specific dollar amount of funds, 50-50 is last I heard, to certain parts of our mission, which is to look at all options. However, the Board of Finance had suggested 50% on a new building and 50% on a potential renovation addition building. Unfortunately, there are a lot more items in this building committee's charge that we're going to need to hire consultants for. It's not just hiring consultants to look at a new school or a renovation or an existing building. We currently have a need for a recording secretary. We have a need to get latest information on projections of the town. So there are a lot of other consultants that we're going to need this money for. It's not just for, two set paths that were, discussed earlier. I do have some proposed language And bear with me for a second here. I had it open on my screen, but just give me a minute. So I put together, you know, since I wrote the original recommendation to the Board of Finance for the appropriation of the funds, I put together a revised, like a modification to it, and I wanted to share that with you guys. Let me just see. So. Okay, can you guys see? Can you guys see the screen? Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so the recommendation, based on basically what I just said, you know, we understand that the Board of Finance's concern was to ensure that the school building committee reviews all options for the renovation, consolidation / new school. There are other sections of the SBC charge that will require some consulting expertise, as well as hiring a recording secretary for our future meetings, which is also important to understand and include herein. So I'm offering the following, the language, basically the first bolded section is what we originally submitted. I'm adding a sentence here: the funds may be utilized to hire consultants to assist the SBC with the review of multiple options, including but not limited to renovation, addition, or new school, and any other items needed to assist the SBC in fulfilling the charge of the committee. So this was, again, I wanted to share that with you guys before I asked Mike to present it to the Board of Finance, and wanted to get your feedback. I'm trying to get everybody back on the screen.
Catherine, I'm
Hang
not
on.
sure if you can see Gary has his hand up.
I can't, just give me 1 second.
I can wait.
Yeah, it's tricky. Okay, go ahead, Gary.
Okay. I was just gonna suggest, maybe if we got that, that sheet that Collier's produced tonight and showed us, that really showed, you know, it showed the kind of two options. And it showed under each one specifically the activities that we would need to go through, right?
Okay.
So maybe that's getting closer to what they're asking us. And obviously I want to hear from Mike about more about the conversation. But other than that, I'm not sure really what more we can present at this point. Like you said, we have to have some flexibility, and there's various different things that we're going to need some expertise on.
Right.
So maybe that's a good place to start. Is the meeting tomorrow? Is that right?
Tomorrow night. Yes.
Okay, so I don't know if we can get that from Collier's by then, but that might be useful.
Thank you, Gary.
Catherine, I apologize real quick. I'm going to turn the video off in our room because we're having internet stability issues. So Justin and I are still here. You just may not see us.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, did you have something? Did you want to say?
I do.
Yeah, there are other people have their hands up first, so why don't you let them go, and then I can speak to how I think we should address things with the Board of Finance.
Okay, was that you, Ralph, that said I do?
That was me.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, we have a bit of a flow chart as to how the process will work. At various points in time, we're going to need different consultants. Obviously, we're going to start with an owner's project manager or project rep, whatever it is. I mean, we're going to have to do an RFP, RFQ for that.
Yeah.
Why don't we just ask for what we need at this juncture in time, with the understanding that we'll be returning to release additional funds as we bring additional consultants on board? We don't need 100,000 to get an owner's project manager on board. And I think you're going to find that much more palatable by the Board of Finance members.
Ralph, Ralph, thank you for your question. Mike, would you like to respond? Because I believe we did that.
No, we did not.
Yes, we did, Mike.
We asked for $100,000 is what we asked for.
Mike,
Ralph,
can you speak up?
Ralph, hang on a second. Yeah, I think you're misunderstanding what Catherine is saying. Catherine, I think you're saying what you mean by we is you and I.
Nope. When we first presented this to the Board of Finance, we had 100,000. And when it first got voted down, I think you had made an adjustment in the cost because there was a thought that maybe, to Ralph's point, we didn't need all this money right now. So you had proposed reducing it to 30,000 and it still got voted down.
Yes. Okay,
So
now I understand what you're
all
saying.
I'm saying, and you know, I don't disagree with Ralph's suggestion here, but all I'm saying is that we did that. It was already presented to the Board of Finance with a lesser amount, and that still got voted down. What I heard in the last Board of Finance meeting was that they wanted to specifically allocate a certain percentage of dollars for one process, whether it be a new school and another process, whether it be a renovation and addition. And my point to that is that it's not just those two options. We have to explore other options. We're going to need multiple consultants to do other things for us to help us gather all these things. Like I said, with getting information to help support the Board of Education specs. You know, we may need to hire an expert to help with getting those ed specs completed. So it's not as easy and as simple as the Board of Finance had requested, which is the reason why I worded it the way I did. So, Anne, did you have your hand up?
Yes. Is it my understanding that every time we make a request to the Board of Finance, we then have to have a town meeting to approve that allocation? Is that true, Mike? Can you help me with that maybe? That every time we.
I believe if we were to go in pieces, then this committee would have to make the next request to the Board of Finance, which would then trigger a request to, if it was approved by the Board of Finance, then it would create a request to the Board of Selectmen. If it was approved by the Board of Selectmen, they would then call a town meeting. So yeah, this process would happen every time if we did it in pieces.
Okay, that's one consideration.
So is there any other feedback about the friendly amendment to what we had previously sent?
I had my hand raised. I don't know if you can see
Oh,
that.
sorry.
I can't see, I'm sorry.
Erica, that was my concern as well. So I think we saw a plan from consultants that I believe answers the concerns that we heard from the members of the Board of Finance. It is, I'm going to apologize if I'm hollering. I forget the speakers in front of me now, not across the room. So we saw a plan from consultants that I believe answers the questions. And it's this committee's job to determine the needs of the funding, not the Board of Finance's role. And so that flow chart that we got from the presentation tonight, I believe should, answer some of their questions. To Ralph's point about going back as we need funds, I'm not sure that I'm aware right now what the cost will be. And so what portion of those funds would we ask for? Are we asking for enough? Every time this committee needs to vote, wait till it can get on the agenda of a Board of Finance meeting. If it takes them multiple months to agree to what we've asked for, then it goes to a Board of Selectmen meeting, then to a town meeting, which has a cost attached to it. And so I think I'm not sure that it's the best way to do it. We're asking to trust this committee to be making the right decisions with the funds for the school building committee. These are all in public meetings. There will be nothing hidden about what we're doing with the money. The flow chart points out what we're doing, but for process to continue to go back every time we need another dollar is going to be very costly at the end of the day.
Thank you, Erica. The only concern I have with, we can certainly attach that slide as a reference. But again, that slide is not all inclusive of all the consultants that we may need to hire to get us through this process. Don't forget, there's an item in our charge, which I highlighted earlier, that we have to identify potential future uses of 2 current or maybe even 1 current school building if necessary. So we're going to need to hire a consultant for that. And that's not tallied anywhere. That's not listed anywhere. That's part of the SBC and fulfilling the charge of the committee. So, I mean, I'd like to put a motion on the floor to modify this recommendation and submit it to the Board of Finance for approval. You guys have it on your screens. So Mike?
I see Ralph's hand up. Did he get in?
I did, I'm sorry.
Okay.
And Peter too.
Okay, so I think process-wise, I think because of the 2 meetings that it's been rejected at the Board of Finance, I think process-wise, we have an understanding of concerns about things seeming vague and seeming open. And so I think Catherine and I talked a little bit about this language as far as what we thought was more appropriate to assure the Board of Finance that this committee was presenting a prudent request, if you will. There were a couple other versions very similar to this. I had written another version which says virtually the same thing with a few different words. And actually, since then, I was lucky enough to track down, with help of others, the project number that belongs with this, and got it confirmed by Donna so that we know the right project number. So I also think that if this committee approves revised language such as this, we should also add in the project number, because I think that makes it more specific and similar to some previous actions we've taken like this. I think the idea of breaking it up into multiple attempts, I did try that before because I thought it might be palatable, but it does create this process problem of having to go through this over and over again and at each juncture. And lastly, the reason I asked the consultant during his presentation tonight if there are other people who do this same kind of work, which I believed there were already, is that I think I see an opportunity there where we could put out our proper bidding process, RFP/RFQ, whatever the proper process is. We could bring a consultant similar to Collier's, or if they win the bid, that it's them, whatever. Bring them on board and have them have the ability to bring sub-consultants in as needed. In which case, we would not have to continually recontract. We wouldn't have to tie up our business office with constantly doing new RFPs. We would dial in and out the consultants needed as this progresses. And that diagram that he used with the 2 parallel paths, I think helps to kind of lay that out. And then when you add in what Catherine just said about our needs to look at the existing buildings, if the idea that Ralph presented, which a lot of us like, is that we find a way to reuse Hall School, then we would, as part of our charge, be needing to talk about what we do with Center School. And it seemed that in his discussion, they even have done that. So my feeling is if we can bring on a company like a Collier's, we would be able to dial in all of these other services and do it all in an above board and public way. Everything is trackable and traceable, and we would not have to go through layers and layers of process tying up the finance office, and also potentially driving the voters crazy, asking the townspeople to come back to town meeting after town meeting after town meeting for what appears, at least to the layman, to be almost the same request every time.
Thank you, Mike. Phil?
Yeah, and I think just to add to Mike's point, I think that's why you need to be very cautious and exact how you write your RFP. Because if you don't include something, you don't get it. So when you write that RFP, it needs to be specific about including, you know, when we dealt with the roof project, we asked for, you know, the OPM included the cost for hazardous materials for the testing. That's built into that. You would want to do that. And that is also the downfall of breaking this money out, is because if you break it out, you have to write your RFP so specific that you only get a chunk. And then you'd have to write another RFP. And I don't know town processes, I know board process, and the number of bids, the amount of money to get, you know, the number of quotes you would need. But if we're talking about $10,000 or $5,000, and every single time you have to write a new RFP for a piece, that is also adding time, and someone's got to write that RFP and be exact. Last thing I'll say about that is just in my conversations with Scott Pellman from Colliers, is that he mentioned that they're in Wyndham, and Wyndham started their process without the proper, what I'll say, the proper channels, proper folks on board. They submitted their application into the state. It was like $80 million in Wyndham. And all of a sudden it wasn't, things were not working. And they actually had Colliers come in after the fact, clean everything up. And they were the ones that actually convinced Costa to go up over 100 million and to do it the proper way. So, you know, you want to have an OPM that's not limited in scope from the standpoint of you can only do these 4 things. And then if you put another RFP out, you might get a different OPM for the second chunk. And now you're trying to fill them in with information. I just see that being pretty time consuming and probably very frustrating for people trying to follow the process.
Thank you, Phil. Peter, did you still have something to add?
I do, an observation and a suggestion. I strongly urge that we stop speaking disdainfully of our town's fiscal practices and that we don't like town meetings or they're cumbersome. This is the town we live in and this is how we operate. And I think it's better to work with the Board of Finance or the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Education than against them. Having said that, I want to agree with Catherine. We have some immediate costs. We need a secretary. We need some data. And perhaps we could restore some credibility with both the Board of Finance and the community by, say, requesting, pick a number, $5,000 or $10,000 for these smaller items so we can get moving and simultaneously work on the RFP for the owner's rep so that we can then, after digesting some of these smaller tasks, bring that person on. That would also give us some time to create some direction before the owner's reps on board. I don't know if that's making sense to anyone, but I think taking baby steps after saying, give us our money and leave us alone would be a step in the right direction.
Thank you, Peter. Mike?
I want to clarify my comments. I didn't mean to be implying that the town process were disdainful or that I'm speaking disdainfully of the processes. As the chairman of the Board of Finance and the Board of Finance's representative to this committee, I find our process incredibly important and valuable. Otherwise, I wouldn't put all the volunteer time into it. So if I could clarify by saying what I'm trying to do is avoid where it can become cumbersome. The superintendent just spoke to it also. If we have multiple RFP processes, that's a huge amount of work for people. And it also means that, again, as he said, you could have, say, ABC consultant hired for this portion, and then XYZ consultant wins the bid on the next portion. Now we have the added work of information sharing, not unsurmountable, but cumbersome again. I think that we should try with improved language and with adding in the project number to what's here on the screen. I think we should try to recognize to get this committee's work back in front of the Board of Finance, ask the Board of Finance to recognize that this committee has taken another look at it. That we are a committee of concerned people who want to do the right things for the town. And we should also be respecting the townspeople who signed the petition to ask it to go to town meeting. And we should move this process along and allow the taxpayers as the ultimate legislative body to have their say. And respect their wishes. Certainly, the amount of people who signed the petition does not represent a majority of Willington voters, but it represents the appropriate amount of Willington voters to call the meeting. So I want to respect that process also.
Thank you, Mike. So again, I'd like to just reiterate the motion on the table that was submitted by myself to approve the revised language that you currently have up front of you. I can read it if you'd like, but the addition, the first bolded part is what was submitted initially to the Board of Finance. And the second part is the funds may be utilized to hire consultants to assist the school building committee with the review of multiple options, including but not limited to renovation, addition, or new school, and any other items needed to assist the SBC in fulfilling the charge of the committee. In hearing about the process and how we'd have to go back multiple times if we were to break it out, to Peter's point, I actually thought that this committee would be able to utilize those funds to hire the consultants that we need to fulfill our charge. I'm not sure if this is typical of other Board of Finance items where the Board of Finance would request specific use and dollar amounts for funds like this, but I think we need, as a committee, we need the flexibility to be able to hire the consultants we need to fulfill what is in our charge. And I feel like this language is representing that. Mike, to your point about adding the friendly amendment, we can add the project number in here. If you tell
Catherine,
me.
I would suggest that right after the words school building committee consultants, that you put parentheses, project 04-4041. Close parentheses.
Like, does that mean the account where it comes from?
That number is from Donna. I think that's
A project number is attached for accounting purposes, and so that's a project number we would use. So what Donna gave him is what, if our business manager were drafting a motion, would probably put in it, so for tracking purposes and complete transparency.
So people would know where that money was coming from?
Correct.
It's coming from reserve and going to project 04-4041.
To that point, Mike, I think somewhere in there, it should say that it's money from the reserve fund.
It did at one time, didn't it? Or one of the versions of this did say that?
I believe so.
Where should I add that?
You
From
could-
reserve project number, or like right here?
To appropriate $100,000 for the school building committee from reserve fund for.
Yeah, so just add after your word reserve from, there you go, from the reserve fund.
Could you add,
Wrong place.
could you add reserve fund after the 100,000? To appropriate 100,000 from the reserve fund for school building committee?
I believe that's correct. $100,000 from reserve fund to projects, ...
Yeah, so, okay, so, yeah, so go ahead, put the project number there. And then take out after the word, after the word committee, take out the word for. Oh, there you go. Get rid of that. Okay, and then take out that word for. There you go. Okay, that's what I would envision.
Could we also change the word may, will, to have less ambiguity about the intent?
You know, I kind of suspected that might be a sticking point. The only reason why I chose may was because if we say will, that implies that we're gonna spend the full 100,000 and we may not. So that's why I said may.
Well, that, if I can comment, I would say that's why I'm suggesting that we not ask for the 100,000 and come up with a lesser sum.
Well, you
Yes,
heard
yeah.
tonight, Peter, we tried that and they still, it wasn't about the amount. We tried that.
So
If it's-
Catherine,
Use the word will, it doesn't mean that if something comes in lower, we wouldn't need to spend it. If we,
right,
you know, if everything came in at 70,000, let's just say $70,000, because we said we were going to, we asked for $100,000, doesn't mean we
There you go.
spend it if the bill was only for 70,000. So.
I agree with what Erica's saying.
Yeah, tomato, tomato. If you want it in there, you know, it's fine. I just wanted to explain why that was chosen, that's all.
Any chance I can ask a question?
Sure.
First question, who's going to contract with the design firms, the architect, the engineer, et cetera? Is that going to be a contract between the town of Willington and the school building committee and the architect? Or is that going to be through the owner's project manager?
Well, I don't imagine it'll be the owner's project manager. That would be like them managing all of our contracts. I believe the architects will be hired by the town of Willington.
Does that money come out of the 100,000?
No, no, this is,
Okay,
this is, that's under a different, that's under a different request.
okay. We have to bid for owner's project manager, correct?
Correct.
Because we have a bid ordinance. That bids are directed to the Board of Selectmen who open them. I would hope that this committee gets an opportunity to review those bids before a decision has been made with respect to an award. Once it's been decided who to award the project to, with the dollar amount associated with that, what's the next step? Does that have to go to town meeting to get okay to spend, to contract for those services?
I believe so, Ralph, but one correction I want to make, and Phil, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe the RFP responses are going to go to the Board of Ed. I mean, that's our
No.
charge.
I said Board of Selectmen.
Right. I'm not sure if that's accurate either. Erica,
Why
That's
wouldn't
what
it
our
come to
bid
us?
ordinance requires.
because we're asking for the charge. Erica, can you clarify that? Like, why would
Correct,
it,
and yes, I believe this committee would then review those.
right?
Absolutely, because the Board of Selectmen represent the town, and so the bids would come in that direction, but this committee, I believe, would be the proper committee to review them.
record.
Yes,
That's fine. And once a decision has been made to enter into a contract for a specific dollar amount for those services, does that need to go through Board of Finance and a town meeting again?
So I do not believe so, Ralph, because the money has already been appropriated. So we already did that and went through the process to ask for the dollars.
But
Which is what we
that's
did.
assuming that this motion gets through Board of Finance, of course.
That is correct. And through a town, we're assuming that even if the Board of Finance moves this forward to a town meeting, that the town meeting votes yes. So there's the steps until we get there. But once the dollars have been appropriated, we would not need to go back to town meeting to authorize.
You're cutting out, Erica.
I'm sorry. we need some dollars to upgrade Wi-Fi in here. I don't believe we would need to go back to town meeting, Ralph, because the dollars would have already been appropriated if through the first process, the town meeting votes yes for appropriation of these dollars for the school building committee.
Okay, I'm not trying to be obstructionist or anything like that. I just want clarity to make sure everybody understands what
I
the
agree.
process may
And I
involve.
think those questions all need to be answered once we, before we move forward, after this particular portion.
Okay, so is there a second? So I made a motion and made some modifications here based on our discussion. Is there a second to submit this revised language to the Board of Finance in their next meeting? And
I'll second the motion.
could you say it one more time? I'm sorry.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. It cuts out a little bit. I think we're all doing a little bit of cutting out tonight.
Yes.
And shall we take a vote? Anne?
Yes.
Just point of order, Catherine, you do, even though we've discussed this ad nauseum, after the second, you do have to ask for discussion.
Oh, okay.
Discussion? Peter?
I just want to express disappointment that we're not fundamentally changing this request. And if it remains as ambiguous as it is, I'm fearful that we will have difficulty again with the Board of Finance. And I can't support it, but thank you.
Peter, how would you suggest it? How would you suggest a revised language to this, other than the dollar amount? Because as we stated earlier, we presented that to the Board of Finance, who voted it down, so.
And I appreciate that, Catherine, and I think Mike is the chair of the Board of Finance, so he, if need be, he can always opt for that option again during their deliberations. But I think changing that word from will to may would give some confidence that at least we're going to use the money for what intended for. Oh, did you change it?
I did change it, yep.
Oh, I apologize. I am fading. Thank you, Catherine.
No worries. So anything else?
Nope, no, that's very reassuring.
Okay, so let's, so Anne seconded the motion, discussion.
Can I
Is there
just
any
make a
other
suggestion
discussion?
Can I just make a suggestion before you vote, that you please read that, just in case anybody's on the phone, just read the
Entire,
entire motion as you would like it to be voted on.
okay, thank you, Phil. The motion on the table is for the school building committee respectfully request the Board of Finance to ask the Board of Selectmen to hold a town meeting to appropriate $100,000 from the reserve fund to project number 04-4041 for school building committee consultants as previously approved by voters at the 2021-2022 annual town meeting. The funds will be utilized to hire consultants to assist the SBC with the review of multiple options, including but not limited to renovation / addition or new school, and any other items needed to assist the SBC in fulfilling the charge of the committee. Mike?
One thing I think probably for formality, the 2 times that SBC is abbreviated, it probably should be spelled out.
At least the first time.
In my world, SBC is the state building code.
State building code. Okay.
Catherine, you should move that up a couple lines. You have SBC in the first red line there.
Yeah.
Oh,
Copy that up and then paste the SBC down below.
Yep.
Down below, you can use SBC.
any other modifications?
It's a thing of beauty.
Okay, let's take a vote. We'll start with Anne.
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes,
Brianna,
Yes.
Erica,
Yes.
Gary,
Yes.
Ralph,
Reluctantly, yes.
and myself, yes.
No, you, Justin.
Justin, thank you. Sorry,
Yes.
Justin.
It's okay.
Did I miss anyone?
You.
So I think it's unanimous, so motion carries. I will submit this to Mike. You'll be seeing this in your email to present this to the Board of Finance in tomorrow's meeting. I believe it's already on the agenda.
Yes.
So I'll send you this document. I better make sure I save it. All right, let me see how I can unshare now. Just bear with me for a second. Okay. All right, thank you all for your feedback. So the next item on the agenda for old business is request for proposals, owner's project manager. This has been on our agenda for a few meetings now. And I think we have to get through that first appropriation approval of the funds before we take this next step. Unless there's any discussion about this, I'm going to move on. Phil?
Can I just make a suggestion that people go back, because there's a couple things we've talked about tonight where we have information, it's in your Google folders that is for this committee. And the Mansfield sample, there's a couple RFQs, RFPs that are in there for owners, project managers, and just go and look at them. We were talking about ed specs tonight and sample ed specs. There's samples in your folders. So please take the information that you have at your fingertips, go into those folders and see what's there, because under archived information, there's RFQs, RFPs, enrollment data, statutes, codes, ed specs, ADA stuff. There's a lot of information there that can be reviewed by committee members.
Thank you, Phil. Unless there's any other comments, let's jump down to item C. Committee
He has his
member,
hand raised. I don't know if he wanted to speak.
who was it? I'm sorry.
Ralph.
Ralph, did you want to say something about the RFPs?
Maybe
No.
just.
He's muted. I just clicked. to see if he-
My mistake, I'm sorry. My hand's up, but it's muted, so what good does that do, I guess? I'd like to see a draft RFP, RFQ at a future meeting before we go too far in this. I think that folks need to read and understand these things. And I think it also has to wrap around the concepts that we've talked about tonight for either direction that this project ultimately goes. I think all of that needs to be included in an RFP, RFQ.
Yep, and that's precisely what Mr. Stevens was relating to with respect to directing the committee members to go look at some samples on our Google Drive. There's a series of samples there, and we haven't even started this process yet, Ralph. So I think this is definitely something the committee members have to, us committee members have to work on, but we need to look at some samples in order to get started on that. And we need some help. We need some help to prepare it.
We need to start outlining what should be in it.
Right. So does everybody have access to the Google Drives that Phil was mentioning earlier? Okay, there should be some samples in there. So item C, committee member volunteer for recording secretary. I'm sure Brianna was waiting until we got to this this line item and we're trying to convince her to stay, but we understand. So I just have to throw it out there. Are there any members of the committee that would be willing to to volunteer to take over the recording of the meeting minutes moving forward.
I'm raising my hand, but I'm not volunteering.
Oh, come on, Erica.
Well, that's hard, so I hesitate to ask another member to volunteer simply because we heard from Brianna that it was difficult, more difficult than she had anticipated to participate in the meeting as much as every other member and still actively take notes. If all she did was watch the meeting, it would take a considerable amount of time to take the proper minutes. I know we don't have any funds. I want to take, I'm taking another look at the selectmen's budget. And I believe with a staffing incentives change in my office, that we may be able to have some dollars to put towards this. So maybe if we try to someone by our next meeting, I will have an answer as to whether or not we can use dollars from within the selectmen's budget for similar to how under the selectmen's budget, we have dollars for a CIP recording secretary. And I think at least through the rest of this fiscal year, I may be able to fund that. And that way we could find someone, unless there's a citizen who wants to volunteer their time, but pay a recording secretary. And that way Ms. Ross could fully participate as a member.
Thank you, Erica. Any other feedback or volunteers? Erica, you were cut out. You cut out just a little bit, and I'm not quite sure I heard the part where you said there's a staffing change.
So there was a change in staff in my office, and I believe the salary savings there may in dollars from at least a line item for education and training in my budget. Well, I may be able to find the appropriate dollars so that we can pay someone. Again, I think it's important that Brianna be able to fully participate, and I highly doubt that someone else taking minutes would find it any different, and they then wouldn't be able to debate and participate as much. So I think we can come up with the dollars. And I'm going to work with a business manager on that aspect tomorrow, and I will get to you as soon as possible, and then we can begin recruiting for recording secretary. Again, we can find one, but I think it's important that it not be a member of this committee. We need to hear Brianna's concerns.
Does anybody else share Erica's concern? And I'm just curious, Erica, do you think we should put this on the agenda for our next meeting? Do you think we would have an answer by then?
If we hire a recording secretary, they need to be appointed by the Board of Selectmen, and so then we recruit. So I say we work to recruit. If I have the dollars, let's go out there and get somebody. Unless this committee, vehemently objects to us trying to find a proper recording secretary. There are many members here who sit on other boards. Could you imagine having to participate and take the minutes, and how that would affect your participation in the board? Is there someone here on this call that would like to take our minutes? It's not a member. But it's a lot of work, not just outside the meeting, but inside the meeting too.
And Brianna's doing a great job with it, I have to say.
Well, thanks. I was gonna say, do I look extremely stressed over here?
No, you're doing a great job. It's definitely a lot of information. As you guys know, we've been meeting for over 2 hours right now, and there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of questions, a lot of feedback, presentations, and to capture all that in a document called meeting minutes, it's a huge task. So I think you're doing an excellent job, and whoever the new recording secretary is going to be, they're going to have some tough shoes to fill.
And it's anticipated that to complete the minutes, it's double the time, double the length of a meeting. So outside of this meeting, the assumption is we're looking at another, 4 to 5 hours of work. So her time is valuable inside the meeting as a member of this committee, and that's what I want us to get to.
Okay, well, thank you. So we'll move on to new business. We had on here enrollment study process overview. Phil, is this something you wanted to review or
I
do we
think
want?
that's up to the board tonight. I think after Scott shared what he shared tonight in his presentation, I mean, I think you've seen the NESDEC reviews. You know it has to meet the criteria of the school construction grant and review. You know it is the 8-year high is the number they use in their projections, how they identify the square footage. And that information is in the document that is the Connecticut School Construction Standards and Guidelines of how they determine how much space you could use. And that applies, you need that enrollment projection completed, whether you do a new building or a renovation, and to be honest with you, if you just did capital improvement projects that were eligible for grant funding, you need it for that as well. So, you know, you're talking in the range of, actually, I just got an email today from Dr. Peter Prouda, putting in some information out. I think he was around $5,000, but, you know, an enrollment study typically is, you know, $3,000 to $5,000. And they look at all the births, they look at, you know, the last 10 years, they look at the demographics in your area. It's a lot of information, but you need that in as part of your grant application process. So I don't know if you want me to go into any more detail than that. I thought Scott actually shared more about that tonight.
No, I think what I'm hearing, it sounds like that might be something, if the funding does get approved, that might be one of our first things that we could engage them to get going for us, is that enrollment study. Because as mentioned by a few committee members, that information is a few years old, even though it's 8-year high, that could be used for the application. It sounds like we need to go ahead and do that regardless of what path we're going down.
Correct.
So,
Current is required.
okay, thank you. So next item, discussion
They have
on,
hands up, Catherine.
I'm sorry, and
Yes, I just wanted to ask if that was necessary for the ed specs. Is it important that we have the correct numbers for the ed specs?
It is part of the process, but it's more about what are you looking for spaces. You do want a ballpark of the number of classes, but that's why the cap, the high number, is important. And that's why they're saying do your enrollment study right away.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
okay, so any other hands up that I can't see? All right, next item, discussion on questions to the Hall Foundation regarding Hall Memorial School. We did receive some questions from the committee members. Let me see if I can get them on my screen.
Catherine,
Yes.
I don't know if I'm as an odd member of this committee. I don't know if I can make motions, but this might be something that we may want to take up at a future meeting. I don't see anybody from the Hall Foundation here. We have not, I think if you could share out the questions that members have submitted. I didn't see any questions come into me, so I don't know if it makes sense of what the committee members think, if this is something to put on a future agenda.
Thank you, Phil. Peter actually sent it to the entire committee, but I'm just going to do a share screen real quick here if I can figure this out.
I
Share
did not
screen.
get that.
Okay. Can everybody see that? Can you
Can I
guys see?
Catherine?
Can you see my screen?
We can.
Okay. Sorry, who?
In your communications report, you indicated that you had reached out to Mrs. Castles from the Hall Foundation.
Yes.
Was there any indication as to whether or not they'd be willing to come to a committee meeting? I know there had been some issue of being out of state in summertime. Is there a change to that?
No additional feedback, Erica. I emailed her the invite and the agenda, as well as these questions, but I have not heard back. I know she was out of town, but as soon as I hear back from her, I will update the committee on that.
Can I make a suggestion, Catherine?
Sure.
I believe the Hall Foundation meets periodically to conduct their affairs. It might be good for us to know when that is so that we can get to them our collective questions so they can have their own internal discussion and then send a representative to our meeting to speak with us.
I agree with Peter.
So we should invite ourselves to their meeting? Is that
No,
what-
no. I'm saying we should try and get our
No, I'm
questions.
just being honest. I don't know. I mean.
No.
For them to discuss at
That's
a
a-
meeting.
That's a closed meeting. You would not be invited.
But you're
I'm
saying to
We
share,
want to send our questions to them so they can.
right, which I did.
You know, and then whoever they send to our meeting, our public
see.
meeting, will have an idea of what we're doing.
Yeah, I did send them, Peter.
Oh.
I sent your questions to her along with the agenda.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
So whenever they're meeting, I don't know. I just know they meet periodically.
I see.
Helpful for them to get on it.
Okay, thank you. So I don't know if we want to go through each one of these, Peter, if you want to, I can scroll through.
Catherine.
I think they're pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And everybody got them before this meeting. So the only thing I would say is that if there are any additional questions that may have been triggered from what's before you here. Mike?
I was going to say, as you were talking about whether we should go over them, we have them and we also can see them on the screen. To be honest with you, I think it's a great list of questions. It has every question that I was going to add to the list is already in this, plus some questions I didn't think of. So I feel good with this list of questions.
That
Okay.
list of questions be shared with me. That email did not come to me.
Okay, yep.
No, you have to screenshot it, Phil.
I'll send it. to you, Phil.
Stop complaining, Phil.
Just say to, if you're, Peter sent them to the committee, did not include Phil, but did include our town clerk. I'm just curious why.
I just cut and paste the whole group, and Phil, I apologize. I assumed you were in the whole gaggle of emails.
Problem.
I'll forward this to you.
Thank you.
It probably was an email that was the agenda that came from Phil.
Yep, that's what I did.
That would make sense. Okay, I'll forward these, Phil. I apologize. That's the only reason you see me on my phone here.
So Peter, thank you for taking the time to put these questions together. Like Mike said, there were definitely excellent questions. And I was trying to see if there was anything else we should ask, but I think you pretty much covered it.
Yeah, I had 6 questions and all 6 of them are in these, so.
Okay, if there's no other discussion, the item C, which is the one that we added earlier in the meeting, request for a finance subcommittee topic. So I think Peter would have to restate his motion to add a subcommittee. Is that right?
I will move that the Willington School Building Committee add a finance subcommittee, purpose of which is to look at both revenues, potential revenues, and costs for any project the committee considers or pursues.
I'll second. Me.
Motion, discussion. Mike?
P, just if you would kind of share the wisdom that you're working with on this idea, what path you're going down to, because in what I was hearing with talking with the consultants, it will take time to develop a lot of this information. Certainly construction costs would be way down the road. And reuse of a building, if we decided not to be using both buildings at the end of this process, potential of either rental revenue or whatever, I guess those are way down the road. So share with me what you were thinking of getting started on that now.
Sure. I agree, Mike. There'll be parallel activities with consultants and other entities later in the process as we define our direction. But there are certain things that are basic to the entire venture we're on here. For example, just the simple ability of a town to afford any project. What is that? Do we look at our grand list? Do we look at our budget? Do we look at our capital budget? The impact of a project of this scale on our capital budget, different economic factors that impact our community. And then, of course, this project, things like COVID, of course, can't ignore that. Things like the foundation issue, things like currently our stagnant economic growth and unemployment. I think we want to look at all of these things and understand where we're starting from an economic base to support a project of this scale, and then evaluate the different options in that context. I think that will be helpful, and I don't think that's something necessarily the consultants will be that helpful with, because we know our town better than they do. We have you and your Board of Finance. We have our Economic Development Commission. These are all resources that we can reach out to look at the ability to support the project, and then ultimately some kind of cost benefit analysis. I, for one, would love to see how the matrix plays out that we saw tonight from Collier's, and see what the final per pupil cost is of a new school versus a renovated school. Are there differences? Are there advantages? I would like us to see that as a committee. And then I think the committee could also look at things like work in parallel with the Land Acquisition Committee. If they're looking at a particular site, they may think it's a great site, but what if there are large cost burdens that we want to be aware of, or environmental impacts, all of which have cost implications, as Ralph was suggesting earlier, carbon footprints and things of that nature. So dollars matter. I know it's unattractive, but at the end of the day, our ability to sell the project to the town will depend on cost. It'll be a major consideration. So I think this would be an important subcommittee to have.
Can I respond to that answer, Catherine?
Sure, go ahead, Mike.
So I think you made some really good points in there, Peter. And I think as this process goes on and we're starting to present or come to a point where we're representing actual options to either the Board of Ed or the town or whatever, being able to address some amount of order of magnitude. The cost per pupil, I think, was a great comment. Maybe cost per square foot of different construction options, or renovation options or whatever. I think a lot of those make sense. I think some of what you described, though, sounds a little broad, like getting into the effect on the capital plan. I'm not sure if that's maybe getting over into Board of Finance and CIP's work and all that. So I guess we should be careful about scope so that you're not burdened with a huge amount of work, or with drifting off in a lot of different directions. But I think there are a lot of good things in here, especially about what the numbers that come with some of the different options we're studying.
Thank you, Mike. If I can just make a couple comments to Peter's point, I think everything he mentioned is definitely important that we have to evaluate. With respect to the process and where it fits in, I believe when we hire our OPM and we start analyzing those two processes that we saw tonight, part of that analysis, defining the scope, defining the budget, that's part of that process. So I only question the reason for creating a separate subcommittee for that. I actually think we're going to be covering all of those items you mentioned, Peter, once we get an OPM on board and once we start digging into the different scenarios of, you know, what does it look like for a new school? What does it look like for, you know, for a renovation addition? But to your point about, you know, you asked a really good question. Can the town afford it? I mean, that may be something this committee can actually ask the town and maybe investigate that. Maybe that's something we just put on our agenda as part of this committee charge instead of creating a subcommittee. Just a thought.
Catherine, you made me think of something, if I could share that also. That I think it's important for us to look independently at cost from the consultant, because sometimes there's a conflict there between what they choose to define as a project and what we think our community can support. I work with a lot of architects and PMs and so forth, and bigger is always better, right? Because their commission is larger. So having a financial check with an independent committee looking at what they present us, putting it in the context of our town, which is something we know best. And I think the townspeople are looking for us to do that and would create a level of trust that would be helpful in moving whichever project we choose forward.
So if I could just add to that, I think that's an excellent point. How about the timing? Can you respond to the timing? Because as Mike noted earlier, we really have nothing to evaluate right now. We don't have any costs. Those are some things that are coming down later. So while I'm not objected to creating a subcommittee for this, I don't know if we're quite ready for that subcommittee, but it's definitely a good idea. I always like checks and balances as well, Peter. So I don't know.
Well, I can respond to that. I think we could look at some of the baseline issues that the Board of Finance can even help us with. You know, what our tax base is, and what you know is driving the economy in Willington. That looking at those general factors would be helpful, and certainly doesn't affect anything the consultant will do later. It can only help.
Right. So how does it, if we were to do this, what are 3 things that you would do first that would benefit this committee? What kind of information would we gather to help us move forward with this committee?
Well, I'd like to look at, and I'm sure Phil would be a huge asset. For example, what our per pupil cost is now and how that's impacted. And I think Phil has spoken about this by having 2 schools. So understanding that better, what we have now, what we're paying for now, will give us a context for looking at new options from our consultant and the committee working with the consultant on renovating or new or some hybrid version like Ralph suggests. So that I think that would be a great starting point for us.
Any other comments? I see your hand, Mike. I just wanted to.
Yeah, I understand you're looking for first timers.
Yeah, Phil?
I just want to make sure we know where this falls in our charge.
Right, that's why I was asking how it's going to benefit. I think overall, we definitely need to look at it. It's just Can
you see my hand raised?
no, I can't. Sorry. Erica?
Sorry, we have to keep turning the video off here. Listen, let the record show, I agree with Peter. Peter, we do agree on more things than you think. And to the point, you know, Phil's point, where does this fall in our charge? Our charge is to at the end of the day, present a pre-K through 8 school that could potentially be, I'm going to use dollars from the prior study, a $45 million project. I think everything about the finances falls within our charge. Right from starting from dollars for a recording secretary to whether or not we can afford this. So I think it may not meet as often as we think. It may not be used here for a little bit, but I do think there's incredible value in forming a finance committee of the school building committee.
Thank you, Erica. And Phil, just to answer your question about where it falls within the charge, item 7, it says working with the treasurer and board of finance and other officials to secure funding, bonding for the projects. So, you know, to Peter's point, we have to know where we are before we know where we're going. So I think evaluating what our existing.
I'm not sure I agree with that, Catherine. I think that that's securing bonding. I think it comes in 3. And I'm don't get me wrong, I agree with the finance committee. I just want to make sure we know what that finance committee, and you asked, what are the 3 points to look at first?
Yep.
I'm looking at the charge, and and that's why I'm asking, is it that connection of developing a building proposal with associated financial commitments? So that, and Peter, we did this right when we got the first round and I started doing presentations early on. It was like, what's the bonding look like? What's the taxpayer impact? We did all those things, and I think that's important to do again. I'm just not sure if we don't have the new numbers. And that's why I'm asking, where does it fall if that's particularly what we're looking at? And I say this, I will say this publicly, and I'll guard this very, very close to me. I will not produce a slash list of staff to go to one building beyond very obvious things of going to one building, because I think what happens if nothing happens with a school building project going to a pre-K through 8, you lose staff. I don't want to see staff run to the hills because of that. So that's why I'm asking these questions. Where does it fall? What are we specifically looking at? And what are we holding back at this point? And you know, what's different than what we did for the prior study? I totally agree with you, Peter, that the finance committee throughout that process is critical. And to be honest with you, it improves transparency, and that's the whole purpose of it. But I want to make it known what specifically we're starting with and where we're headed.
Mike?
I think there's a lot of interest in this subcommittee moving forward. Maybe we need the time between now and the next meeting just to help sort of define what the scope for that subcommittee should be, help sort of create some direction or some guidance for that subcommittee. That's just a suggestion. We also probably need some time for people to email you and say they're interested in being on that subcommittee, right?
I agree wholeheartedly, Mike. I dislike introducing and acting on any topic in the same meeting. So I think that'd be great. If we can have it on the next agenda, Catherine, in the meantime, people make suggestions and ideas about the scope of the committee, I think that would be more than helpful.
Catherine, I see Ralph's hand up too. I just want to make sure I point that out.
Hi, Ralph.
Hi. Yeah, I'm beginning to feel like well, never mind, I won't go there.
It's hard to see everybody, so I know.
I'll buy that excuse. That'll work for
No,
now.
I mean, I see your face, but it's just.
I can't wave my hand. I don't have a camera. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead.
As far as finance committee, I think there's a lot of benefit to understanding what the costs are that drive the education budget. And there's a lot more to it than the building and the staff. There is busing. There's the cost of busing. There's fuel for the buses. And starting to get a handle on where those numbers are hidden in our existing situation will be very helpful for ferreting out those numbers in a proposed new facility, whatever it may be. Understanding the cost implications of our share of the cost of this new facility, whatever it may be. And to at least be able to have a base of what it is now, because we're certainly going to be asked by the taxpayer, what's the impact on my tax bill going to be? And what's going to drive that? Depending on where a school is a new building is located, it's going to affect bus routes, which is going to affect the cost there. There's certainly a number of things that will come into play that we're going to get asked questions about. And we really, as a committee, ought to have those answers when this goes to town meeting. And I really want to see this committee be able to answer those questions rather than a figurehead consultant, because it has more credibility coming from us. Anyway, I think it's a good idea. And I think getting their feet wet with how to find the information is important. And that could start now, in my opinion.
Catherine, would it be appropriate, and parliamentarians who aren't exhausted in the meeting, to move, I know there's a question on the floor, but to table the motion? With that, because what I don't want to do is see us vote. I think I hear us saying we want to gather some more information before we move forward. The appropriate action at this point?
I made the motion, so I'd welcome that tabling action. I'm assuming you're suggesting, Erica,
I am,
to
yeah.
the next meeting. And at the risk of speaking too much, I want to also add that I don't want to just look at the cost side. I want to look at the revenue side.
Agreed.
One of my concerns is that we focused exclusively on state reimbursement or state of Connecticut funding. And I would like our committee to explore other sources of funding as well. And so if people have feedback on that in the time between our next meeting, I'd appreciate that as well.
Okay, we'll table this motion for the next meeting, and we'll put it on the agenda as, I guess, old business for the next meeting. Thank you, Peter. Mike?
Thank you.
As a point of order, I believe we have to either make a motion to table it or we have to withdraw the current motion.
So I made a motion to table.
What's that?
Erica made a motion.
Table.
Second, there's a move in a
Okay.
second and there's no discussion for a move to table.
Okay.
we should vote.
So this motion is to table the motion that's on the floor. Okay.
Okay, next item.
Nope,
We
you
have
gotta
to
take a
vote. We have
vote.
to vote. Ken.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's all in favor and see if that goes.
It's getting late. I apologize, guys.
Aye.
Yeah, so let's take a vote. All in favor to move to table the motion to our next meeting on the recommendation to create a finance subcommittee, say aye.
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 Any
Justin was an aye. I don't know if you can see it.
any nays? Abstentions? Okay, motion approved. So it'll be on the next agenda, next item agenda. Okay. So now can I move on? I'm sure there's some people on the phone still. Thank you for being patient and listening to everything that we have. I just want to open it up to anyone that's present to speak. Please state your name and what your role is. Thank you.
Captain, could I just point out, people should be stating their name and their address unless they're not a Willington resident and they're contributing for some other legitimate means.
Okay, what Mike said, please state your name and your address. Thank you. Trying to see if there are any, I don't see any raised hands.
And they do have the ability to unmute.
And you can unmute yourself if you'd like to speak. I'm hearing no one. Okay, so I make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Second.
We have to
So
vote.
Before we go, can I just ask a question? Our next meeting is now 3 weeks away, I think the 1st of October, first Wednesday in October. You can see there's 2 members of our committee in the room. The rest of us are on camera. We had originally talked about going hybrid. Is that something we still want to move forward with? Or do we want to continue this hybrid? I think it's important to address to see if there's a need.
What were the options, Erica? You said hybrid twice. You mean in person or hybrid?
Yeah, yeah. Well, fully in person, hybrid, or fully remote.
The only people that have shown up in person, right, Erica, have been you and a member?
A member this time, 2 members last time who are now on camera. I think we had a communication from Ralph. He tried the hybrid. He prefers this method. The fully remote, the caveat to that is if someone were to come in and choose to participate, we would have to end of the day. I would be remote. I would be remote from my office in this building. So if need be, and someone came in, I would then come in this room and turn on this camera if that were the case. But if the membership wants to continue hybrid, I'm perfectly fine. Again, I'd be in this building, just in a different room. So I don't know how Justin feels. He was in the room. There's unstable Wi-Fi in this room. So you were breaking up on us a lot. There's fear, I'd fear that we would lose the meeting, in which case we would have moved our participation because it's hardwired. So it's just one more need we have in town hall, and something to think about.
Do we have to vote on that, Erica?
I think a consensus of the board, and that we would just warn it in whatever method we move forward. There were many members that thought it was important that we be in person. Yet, no, folks aren't here in person. If it's because they're not a fan of the hybrid method, I understand that. If it's because COVID cases are still on the rise and there's concern, if it's the ability to participate with a mask on, there's concern there. So I respect all of the reasons why someone might not want to be in the room, but if there's no reason, we could go fully remote. We would not be the only board to do so. Currently, our board, this committee and the Board of Selectmen have been hybrid. And the Board of Finance, I believe, is going to try their first hybrid tomorrow. So we'll see who comes in person to that one.
I'll be there. That's one.
But quite honestly, I prefer full remote, full Zoom. I don't like the mask issue, really. Particularly in the room, and this funky camera that you have there that keeps looking at the screen and not the person speaking.
So it is looking at the person speaking, Ralph. It sees you as the computer. So when Justin speaks, it turns to him, but you're on the computer, so it turns to you.
Yeah, unfortunately, that doesn't do the rest of us any good, though, Erica.
Yeah.
That are Zoom. That's my point.
I hear you. If we were all in the room and only residents were on Zoom, the camera would then turn to each individual person as they spoke, and then you see the panoramic view. So listen, there is no perfect method.
I know.
In these days. So I just want us to consider it. If nobody is going to come into the building, is it worth it to continue to do this way? And Justin's here, so I appreciate his opinion, whether or not he prefers method.
Well, we can't act on it. We can't act on it tonight, I don't think, anyway. It's not on our agenda. We already have a motion to adjourn.
I don't think I don't believe it's an action item. Look, if
Right.
we want to go.
Let's be aware of it.
So,
Let's just be aware of it.
All right, thank you. So I made a motion to adjourn the meeting. It's 9:19. Is there a second, Peter?
A second.
Okay. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, any nays? Abstentions? All right, good night, everybody. Our next meeting is
night,
October
Catherine.
6th. Thank you.
Thank
All right.
you.
Right, thank you.